everybody. Hello, Dr. Kathryn Murray. Thank you very much for joining me again for your second Spark Debate. It's always lovely to talk to you. And we're going to talk about a subject. You chose a subject for tonight: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Huge subject, I think. So we'll start, shall we? I think first of all, we need to understand what those three words mean, because I was thinking about it this afternoon, and for me, I felt it's about understanding, accepting, and providing equal opportunities. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a pretty good definition, I think. And hello to you, Kathryn. And it's nice again to be on Spark Debate. It's always fun when we get time to have a bit of a chat together. And diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. You see that thrown around all the time in articles that you see written. It's on TV. It's everywhere. And I wonder too whether people really think about what that means. Diversity, equity, or inclusion, or is it just the latest buzzword, that we all use and think, oh well, that's sort of I don't know, including everybody. But
I don't think equity is used, but I don't think we tend to use the short form in the UK, or at least correct me if I'm wrong, folks on the chat. And I don't think we tend to talk about inclusion a lot, and diversity a lot, and equal opportunities perhaps not so much at the moment, but we have in the past. That's my view.
Well, I think when you think about the word diversity, so let's start with diversity. When we think about that, in a classroom of children, there can be so much diversity. There can be ability levels, there can be developmental diversity, there can be different ethnic backgrounds, there can be language differences and diverse languages, there can be disabilities, there can be a diverse range of backgrounds, children coming from foster homes, nuclear families, same-sex parents, single-parent families. It's just such a range in our classrooms now, and that is the diversity. And I think, and there's challenges with that, but there's also a lot of beauty in having such a diverse community in your classroom, I think, because it's interesting. Everyone's got a different perspective, and the children come from different places and can share and contribute different ideas and different understandings. And then you get the parents involved too, and it makes for a nice little melting pot of learning, I think. So
I agree. I think sometimes people can be scared of it.
I think so too. But children aren't. Children don't care. Children just see, if you're about the same size as me, we're friends. Let's go play. And that's just I call that opportunistic play. If you're about the same height as me, that means we're both kids and we can play. It doesn't matter if you're in a wheelchair. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter how good you are at throwing the ball. We can still just play together. So that diversity, I think, isn't as evident to children as it is to adults.
Well, I agree. Totally agree with that. Unless, of course, they're influenced by their parents.
Right. That's where we come to that point, because children learn it. Children learn racism, I think, and children, I don't think, because I've seen it so many times in my own classroom. When I was in the classroom for 25 years, I saw so many families and children come through my doors. And then I had pre-service teachers doing their placement with me as well. And you get to see a range of people's opinions and judgments, or non-judgment. It goes that way too. And it's about acceptance, I think. We are all different. We are all diverse. You are different from me. Anyone that's listening is different from you and I. We are all diverse. Even if we've got the same skin color, we're still diverse. We still have a range of different skills, abilities. Yeah. We're all individual. We're all unique.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the EYFS in the UK dictates, that every child is unique. And we should treat them as being unique, with their differences, their likes, their wants, their families, their culture, what they bring with them into our nurseries and preschools.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are
And
all.
I think it's not, I think that's worldwide. You know, I do a lot of work globally with different countries and different people in different countries when I'm working with them with their classroom environments. So I don't think it's just the UK. I think that's a global attitude that we are all unique. And in the policy documents about being unique and accepting people how they are, and also working from where they are. So particularly ability levels or developmentally, working where they're from right now. So seeing this child right in front of me, right here, right now, today, and what they're capable of, and let's work with that and move forward and accepting we're all individual and unique.
When I was in China, I talk about China a lot because I tend to go there most.
Okay.
But when I was in China, one of the first, well, it must have been probably the first time I went. I know it seems a really silly thing to say, and you know, it's obvious, but suddenly it dawned on me that these children, although they were Chinese, they develop in similar ways, with the similar problems, with the similar challenges that all children have. And the parents also, you know, my child won't sleep, my child won't eat, you know, and yet I was in a completely different culture, in a totally a really alien country to me at the time. I'd never been there before, found it quite strange for me. And quite out of my depth in many ways. But the children were just children.
The children are just children. And I've worked in China too, both online and live. And there are similar issues, as you say. The teachers have similar issues. Culturally, they may be a little different and in their expectation of children and what they're capable of. And just a little aside story from that. It's not really related to what we're talking about, but it's a good story, I think, and just sort of highlights the cultural difference and the appreciation that we need to have, I think, for different people's cultures and their background and where they're from and their understandings. I was in a classroom with some children. I think the children, from memory, were about 3. And one of the assistants came and sat down next to me and said, can I ask your advice about something? I said, yes, of course. And she said, well, see that little boy over there? He keeps running through the room, and I'm worried that he's going to hurt himself and that he's going to trip on some of the furniture and hit his head. So what should I do? I've been thinking about wrapping the table in bubble wrap and putting cushions all around the chairs so that he doesn't hurt himself when he falls. And so that was her background. And I said, well, maybe we should teach him not to run in the classroom. And she said, see, that's a difference to the Western culture. We are all about, sheltering and cocooning almost. This is her words, our children, where you are teaching them independence and to do things for themselves. And they were her words. And I thought, I had never looked at it like that, and I hadn't been aware of that sort of approach. And I think, I didn't know that. So I need to be more aware culturally of what the expectation is, and I guess the bar of where people go with their abilities and with their training and what they're thinking about the capabilities of children. It's just an interesting thing, I think. But again, diversity in that classroom. There was a whole range of children. Now, he was one that was running through the room all the time, but there was lots of other little quiet children. And, as you said, across the world, children are really much the same. And, I do a lot around brain development, and we've all got the same brain. It's just really our actions, our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are dictated by the environment that we're in and the experiences that we have. So, we're all diverse. So depending on where that's come from, because we all have different background.
Absolutely. Okay. So what about what about equity then?
Yeah, let's go to equity. I really like the equity one. Now, equity is different to equality. So that used to be the word, equality. Let's make sure there's equality in our classrooms. But now we've realized that equity is a little bit different to equality. So let's imagine this, and some of you may have seen this image that I'm going to describe, but it's 3 children, and they're all trying to look over the top of a fence. One child is tall, the other child is sort of at middle height, and the next child is in a wheelchair. So of course the tall one can just peep over the top and see over the fence. The middle-sized one can't quite. The fence is sort of here, up to the top of his head, and of course the one in the wheelchair can't see at all. So equality is you give them each a box to stand on. So each child gets one box. So of course the tall one can now easily see over. The middle-sized one can just see over, but the one in the wheelchair still can't. But that's equal, right? You gave them each a box. That's equal. Equity is when you make sure that all of the children have access to looking over the fence. So in our case, we make sure that all children have access to experiencing the curriculum and being successful in their learning. So going back to the fence, the tall child might still have one box. The middle-sized child might have two boxes, and the child in the wheelchair might have three boxes and a ramp, because that allows him now to see over the fence. And that's equity, when we make sure that everyone's got the opportunity to access the situation or the learning.
I can remember we had equality training from our head of early years, Harriet Hill. I mention her because I admired her greatly. And this was a long time ago. This was probably 15 years ago. All right, well, perhaps even longer than that. And we just opened our second nursery. So we were quite a big team. And it was all about equal opportunities in those days. And she professed that equal opportunities was not, it was equity. It was not about treating every child the same. It was about enabling every child to access the curriculum. And also something else that was very poignant to that for me in that training was, just because children don't attend, just because you don't have any Chinese children in your nursery, for example, doesn't mean that you should ignore that culture. So it was still important to have images of Chinese children. It was still important to acknowledge festivals, etc., for other cultures that didn't actually attend your setting as well. And I thought that was really because the children, there's a wider world out there, isn't there? And you know, the children that are included in our settings will see children from other countries, from other races, you know, in other places. So I thought those two things stuck with me very much so.
Yeah, because we are in a multicultural world. So
and the world seems to have got smaller since COVID. I mean, or because of COVID, you know, we tend, you know, we're in a global society now. Not, I mean, it used to be very nuclear, didn't it? In you know, in our past generations, where relations used to look after people in the village or people in the town all knew each other and that sort of thing, and then it became more widespread as people could travel. And now and then we've obviously got where you travel to and those communities, but now with the internet, and nobody's worried about showing their face on camera anymore.
No, I think we
were before
we all got used to that. And see, there's the leveler. Excuse me, there's equity right there. We all had to get on Zoom, and we're all, you know, got our pajama bottoms on and a nice top on the top. You know, we all did that. And there's equity right there. We all had to use the same sort of platform and to share with each other. Some of us needed to change things up a little bit. Some of us needed higher chairs. Some of us needed lights on our face. You know, we did what we needed to do so we could communicate. So that's sort of like that adaptive or assisted technology that we use with children who have special needs or some sort of disability. We use different forms of technology or different devices so that they can access the learning and access, you know, experiences the same as children who don't need that. So we were talking before we started recording about the assistive technology with, you know, talk to text to talk, I should say, and the other way, talk to text. It goes that way too, and the amount of technology that has has been put in place now to make sure that everything was equitable and that people can access the internet in a way that allows them to research and learn and type books. And look at Stephen Hawking's, and he had huge disabilities, but a massive, clever brain. And he wrote books, and he was seen as a world authority on so many issues, all because he had this assistive technology to help him.
Yeah, yeah. I was sitting next to somebody last week who works for a charity, and they hire blind or visually sighted people to check people's websites to make sure that they are providing equal opportunities, by providing that equity. I found that really interesting. And Sue's just written in the chat, she uses pale blue background rather than white background on her presentations because she was told that it was difficult to read by somebody who had Arlene's syndrome.
White background is difficult.
Yeah.
So they're the things that we don't even know about. I'd never heard of it. Dr. Sue Ellingham, who was on the call, has told me about that. And I had never heard of that syndrome. So how would I know to change the background of my slide for, to incorporate those people who have that sort of syndrome? So
I'll never have a white slide again, Sue. Okay.
No, I've been changing mine too since Sue's told me that. So that's important. And I was saying to you too, Kathryn, that I noticed the other day when I went onto a website, this box popped up, and it was the accessibility box, and it gave me all these different options that I could choose to read that website. So it had, I could change the size of the cursor. I could make it black. I could keep it white, make it bigger, make it smaller. I could change the background color so I could read it easier. It said, something was said about people with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. They could, if you clicked on that setting, it made the background of the web page less cluttered and much more focused and clearer and easier to read. And there was a whole stack of them, a whole stack of different things that you could do. Hearing impaired people could have it read to them, a range of different things to make that web page accessible. And you were saying that's going to be legislation soon, that all websites...
There is legislation, and I wish I could remember it. I think unconsciously I wanted to forget about it because it's a bit scary, but all our websites will have to be compliant. Otherwise, not just for visually impaired, but for all impairments.
Yeah, for a range of people. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is coming in soon. It is soon, too soon, perhaps. Yeah. Meaning not too soon as it shouldn't be done, but the fact that it's got to be done, and we've got to find a way to fund that and make it happen.
But I think Mr. Google should just put that on every website, really.
Or maybe they will.
Yeah, I hope so. Then we don't have to worry about it, even though it is important and it is something really worthwhile and valid. And I'm sure people who have additional needs will be just over the moon that now they can access material much easier. So I'm grateful for that.
But in a setting, we need to be thinking of things in the same way, don't we? We need to think about the acoustics, how fussy and how busy it is, etc., etc.
Right, because there's overstimulation and understimulation in the environment. So overstimulation, most of us know what that is. And that's when there's too much colour, or the walls. We went through a phase in our classrooms where all the walls were either bright blue or bright red or bright yellow or something, and the primary colours were seemed to be, exciting and help enthusiasm and help people think, all these creative ideas. But all it really did was overstimulate a lot of people. And then when you put in place all of the things that people generally stick on the walls and hang from the ceilings, and then there might be some music playing, and then might be some oils burning, just all the lights and and all the people talking and the noise. It's just too much for some people. So and the fluoro lights too, the overhead fluorescent lights have a buzzing sound in them that we can't hear. But if you are oversensitive to that sort of thing, it's like having a mosquito in your ear. all day, every day. Imagine that. So these environments that are too much stimulation can be very disturbing for children to be able to think clearly and relax and have a calm brain. You know, you said in your introduction, my mantra is a calm brain is a thinking brain. Well, it's pretty hard to have a calm brain when there's all of these things. It's like all these flashing lights almost. It's like being in a nightclub with flashing lights. Too hard. But we can go the other way too and not have enough stimulation for those children who need a little more. So what we need to do is try and have this balance in the classroom where we have some areas that have, lots of open-ended resources that children can access, and other areas that are quite, I don't want to say the word sparse or clinical. They're the two words that are popping into my mind, but that's not really what I mean. I just mean that they're carefully curated, they're carefully designed so that there's plenty of open-ended resources without being overwhelming, without being too many. So there's not that over sensory stimuli. And we need to have quiet places for children to move to so they can just sit by themselves and get away from it all should they need to. And in the brain set environments formula that I know that you know about, that I've created, and that Dr. Sue Ellingham knows about as well, when we talk about that, we talk very much about making sure that we curate the environment so that children have these little spaces that they can get away, small defined spaces, so they can work side by side, or they can work just by themselves, or they can work in a little group of 4. The biggest group would be 6, and that's probably in the block construction space. So children are less threatened, and they're not overstimulated, they feel safer. With brain set, we talk about the SET of the brain, the brain stem, the survival part of the brain, the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, and up here with the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain. So we have to make sure that these 2 bottom parts of the brain are nice and calm so that this top part of the brain can think and shine. And that's what we do in our trainings. And that helps to that. We haven't really talked about inclusion, but let's get to that.
Yes.
If we set up our environments in a way that it's carefully thought about, and you follow part of the brain sets planning process that I've developed, we make sure that not only do we look at children developmentally, we look at their brain development as well. We listen to the voice of the child, what they actually need. We work with their interests. We work with their abilities. We make sure that the learning spaces are equitable. And you might say, well, there's 25 children. How do we do that? Well, it's really just putting in a range of open-ended materials that are developmentally appropriate and positioning the furniture in a way that calms the brain, that soothes this bottom part of the brain, well, these 2, because they're ready for the fight, flight, freeze. They're ready to get on out of here if it doesn't feel safe. Now, often we can suppress that and we just go along in our merry old way. But if we can actually curate and put in place an environment that calms the brain in the first place with these open-ended materials that are developmentally appropriate, whatever small defined learning space the children go into, they can access the materials and they can be successful, no matter what their ability level is, no matter what their race is, no matter what their ethnic background or language is. They have equity because all of these things are included into the spaces. And then we can add things like that assistive technology that I was talking about before, or pencil grips for, something simple, pencil grips for children who have difficulty holding a pencil. We have paper on clipboards because then it's held firmly. So children can, be encouraged to...
Cards and thin cards to cut rather than floppy paper.
Rather than paper. All of those, adaptive things that we can do that cater for children who are diverse. We are looking at equity then so that everyone can achieve and can have a go. And it's inclusive. And it's we're building from their strengths. It's a strengths-based approach. So we're wanting them to succeed. And if we put things in our environment carefully, this DEI just happens naturally. It's just a natural part of the classroom environment.
I agree with you. I think, though, apart from doing that, The downfall is when practitioners are not tuned in to where children are in their learning journey. They don't actually recognise what the child already knows and can do adequately enough to be able to scaffold their learning. So therefore the environment is not in tune with that child, really. And it is about individual children. You know, if a child is interested in worms, then something has got to be in that space to do with worms, in my view.
Yeah. And you're right. I agree with you too. And you've got to think about the skills that you're trying to develop there. So the interest might be worms, but you might want to develop the skill of like one-to-one correspondence, counting to 10, or it might be fine motor skills or something like that. So you might find some little worm, little plastic worms, so you'll put them into that space, and you might, have like a sand tray or something, so the children can, move the worms through the sand tray, and have some, maybe there's a baseboard where they the worms go through the sand tray, then sit on the baseboard, and they count them up till 10, something like that.
Yeah, it's all about the objectives, isn't it?
Right, the skills. We need to think about.
For me, it's about that's the difference between an outstanding setting and one that is good. Is that some settings will set up activities and hope children will gain from them, rather than really think, what do I want to achieve, or what do I want to help this child with, or what opportunities do I want to be providing, and being there observing to watch whether that child is actually gaining the knowledge or the skill that you're hoping that they're going to. And obviously being there for them, not just watching all the time, but being there for them to extend and suggest, etc., and ask questions, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because it's all about building relationships too with children. And when I go into centres and help people design their, we do the training first, and then we go into their rooms and we physically move the furniture around, and do a little bit more training, and we relook at it, and we reflect, review how are things working. But it is about not setting, as you said, it's not about setting up activities. And I think in the UK they're called carousels too, where children go from one to the next to the next. In Australia they're called rotations. It's the same thing, where children, like 10 minutes. Now I was training someone.
They might do that in schools. I don't think we're doing that in nurseries and preschools very much.
Well, I don't know so much.
Okay.
And I was talking to someone in Jordan the other day. She was doing my brain set training, actually, and the course. And she was sending me photos of the classroom. And she said too that the children get, I think she said 5 or 10 minutes at each activity. Then they've got to move to the next and the next and the next and the next. And there's about 6 of them. And that's what they do. That's their indoor playtime. And my comments to her was, okay, so why do you do that? And she gave me her reasons, and part of it was because that's just what they do. That's how the teaching happens. And that's true. That often happens with us. We sort of get swept along with, well, we've always done it this way, so we can't see a reason for change. But the research says that when children are going into a space, they need a good solid 20 minutes to really get into it. And in BrainSet, when we set up the classroom environment, we set it up, and that's how it stays all the time. It's not like, oh, over here is the writing area and there's the play space and this is where we eat over here. It's the whole space is the learning environment, so that children can wander for the first 10 minutes, which is, again, what the research says. Children will sort of wander around, not really get engaged with anything terribly much in those first minutes, and then they will sit for about 20 minutes of really solid, engaged, focused learning or experimenting, skill development, and then they will get up and wander again, and they might go to a different space. And by then it might be time for morning tea, so it's a bit of a change anyway. So there's a whole range of things, and I've got 3 design pillars and 16 elements, 16 design elements that overlap throughout the whole room to allow children to use the materials in an equitable way. It doesn't matter what level and what ability you are. It's, they're very diverse. And you mentioned the worms before, so you might have worms in a couple of the spaces because, that's appealing, and maybe, you might build a bigger crowd that likes the worms. But it doesn't all have to be worms. There could be other children that like
digress to snakes or long bits of string.
It could, or it could just be that some children like the beach. So over in the writing space, you've got books about the beach. You've got those clipboards so that we're encouraging writing. We've got the shells. Now, over there in the literacy space, our idea is that children will be writing about the beach or the shells, or they'll be looking through the books. But they might actually be classifying. They might be working out which shells are the same. They might be counting that one-to-one correspondence that we thought would happen over in the worms is actually happening over here with the shells. But who cares? It's a skill that we're trying to develop. It doesn't really matter where it happens. We just
I had a conversation last night. I often talk at midnight to settings overseas.
Right.
And I was saying, you have a maths area, but actually it doesn't matter where maths happens. It can happen in the home corner. It can happen in the book corner. It can happen anywhere.
And it often does.
The most important thing is that you're you're thinking maths and you're setting opportunities up for maths. And that isn't just in the maths area, which is what one of their classrooms had.
Exactly. And attention to detail in all of these spaces too invites the children in because it looks interesting. It's not just a table with a bit of paper whacked in the middle of it with a few crayons. It's really designed and thoughtful, and they're some of the images from across the world that we show when we do our presentations. We give people ideas of how to do it. Then we sort of show how we can recycle, repurpose, reuse what you already have, and create a different looking space. That's
especially when it's collecting loose parts. Doesn't have to be an expensive job.
No, it really doesn't.
Something that I'm trying to help a setting with, because they want more loose parts and they can't afford them. That's a conversation for next week for me with them.
But there's lots of ways that people can get different furniture and different things. Parents are sometimes, they just want to change. They're changing their couch. They're getting a new one, and they don't need the old one anymore. And they're not going to get much for it if they try and sell it. So maybe they donate it to your centre. So then you've got a nice reading space or some big, floor mats. And, part of what we do is for this whole security and safety part of the brain, we have round mats instead of the traditional square or rectangular ones. So if you can get your hands on a round mat or round tables or round placemats, things that have got rounded corners is one of the elements in BrainSet. If you've got rounded corners,
is that because it reflects the natural environment? We don't have square corners, do we? We don't have right angles in nature.
Well,
right?
there's a few reasons, and that is one of them, that it does reflect nature. But the other reason goes to the brain development. So the brain, particularly in children, sees sharp edges of a table or a shelf, sees a sharp edge as a danger. So down here, it's saying danger, danger, danger. Up here, it's saying, I think it's okay. And up here, it's saying, well, we'll just keep an eye on that as we go past. So we manage all that because we're adults, and children manage it too. So, you don't see children.
We do take a lot for granted as adults, I think.
We do, but our brain is an amazing organ, as we all know, that the brain can see danger. So it perceives those sharp edges as being dangerous, but it can overlook it because it can see the bigger picture and it can overlook it. However, the initial response is danger. But if you had a rounded shelf or a rounded table, there wouldn't be that alert straight up, that trigger straight up.
Wow.
And we're trying to minimize any trauma triggers too. So the more things that we can put into our learning environment that actually calms the brain, the better. So rounded corners is one of them.
Now, plants and water features, I would advocate.
Yep, you've got to. Plants are very nice because that's for sort of like almost a Reggio Emilia sort of approach, bringing the outdoors in. And plants are lovely because they are very calming and they're very soothing, and they're very good things that you can divide spaces up, so you can have multiple smaller defined spaces, and plants is a nice way to be able to do that. Hanging plants plants in pots, plants on the table, plants on the shelves, anywhere. Plants are nice. Water features are soothing to some people, because it might just be that sensory overload, having this constant trickling in the background all the time. It's like when people put music on and they have it playing all day, every day, and they think it's nice and soothing in the background. Sometimes you just want a bit of quiet, just want to turn the music off. And
in
so
our nursery,
things.
I know I've probably told you this before, but in our nurseries, we played what we called outside in music from 7:30 till 10 in the morning, which was just music from the outdoors. You know, it could be running water, it could be thunder, it could be, but quite quietly. And we found that all the children and the parents who were rushing in stressed because they were going to work and they were late or whatever, you know what it's like. Just everybody just
calm down.
And the day just set off so much better.
Yeah. And the other thing around that calmness is, we touched on this before when I mentioned about the brightly coloured walls. We need to have nature coloured walls. We need to have calm walls. So, the pale blues, like your background that you've got there, is nice. It's calming, and beiges and olive greens and pale greens, the colours of nature. And I've seen in different centres that I've been in, and some people have been really clever about this. They've had brightly painted notice boards that they can't remove. There's not much they can do with them. They can't repaint them. They're not allowed to repaint them. So they'll get some calico material and they'll staple the calico over the top of this brightly coloured thing.
Or Hessian.
Or Hessian. So it makes such a difference to the room. It automatically just calms it, and it makes the room look bigger. So it's, that's just an easy, quick fix. You can buy really nice furniture from an organisation called Natural Pod. They're in Canada, and you can buy really nice furniture from them that have the sort of the wavy edges of the tables, and they have incorporated some of the rounder looks, and that's useful for calming the brain.
In the UK, community playthings furniture is quite.
I've heard them.
Curvy.
Yeah, I've had a look at their stuff.
And long lasting and sturdy. You don't have to. You might have to pay a lot of money for it to start with, but I've still got some. I can't part with it.
Yeah, and you can use them in different ways. You don't have to just use a table as a table. If it's got adjustable legs on it, it can become a little stage. Or you can tip it upside down and use the underside of the table and fabric around 3 sides of it, so there's an opening, but you're using the underside of the table. So, or you can have a tall table and you've got something going on at the top, and then there's another space underneath. So we're making lots of small defined spaces for the children to calm their brain, because a calm brain is a thinking brain. And by the time we're finished this session, Kathryn, everyone's going to be sick to death of me saying a calm brain is a thinking brain. But that's what we're aiming for. That's what we're trying to do. And now, getting back to children who have diverse needs or need to have considerations for equity, I was watching something the other day, doing a little bit of research around children with additional needs, and listening to a lot of YouTube clips around that. And I've seen this in my own practice, both in the university where I was a lecturer and also in my classroom when I was a teacher, that children are just children. We said that before. They just don't care who they play with. Children are just children. But they want to be seen. They just, if the child with the disability, they just want to be accepted for who they are. And a lot of children with a disability have hidden superpowers. So it's about tapping into those hidden superpowers, I think, and working out what that child is particularly good at. Yeah. And in these little clips that I was watching, it was a whole range of children, and they were all talking about being seen and people noticing them. As a couple that were in a wheelchair, and they said and one didn't have very good speech, and they were saying we don't like it when people talk to our mother or our carer, talk to us, because we are people too. Don't ignore us. They want to be seen, and I totally understand that. When you put yourself in that position, if someone talked to the person next to you and totally ignored you,
Yeah. But it's
because
about that's about being inclusive, isn't it? Including,
yeah,
making sure that it's not just lip service. You know, we have a child in a wheelchair, so we're an inclusive setting. You know,
yeah,
and also a lot of people in society have hidden problems, hidden disabilities, and in our settings, you know, there could be a lot of children who go undiagnosed yet because, you know,
they're too
they're either
young.
very clever at covering it up, or it's just not something that's being looked for.
Yeah,
I mean, dyslexia is one of the things I'm thinking about, top of my head.
That's true.
Or even a child, and I remember a child in my nurseries. You know, this was an incredibly long time ago. She shouted all the time, and she just couldn't help herself. And I wondered whether if she could actually hear. So we did some silly games, you know, behind a sheet with various things. We didn't single her out by any means. We did it with the children as a group, and she couldn't hear.
Right.
And because she shouted I remember her name was Jennifer. I remember very clear, very bright, quite a big child for her age, but very bright, very much into everything. But she shouted all the time.
And that's the thing, you need to look for the physical reasons for the behavior first, and then dig a little deeper if there's nothing physically going on. But you know, we all have superpowers, I believe, and some children have exceptional superpowers.
Absolutely.
Like children with autism, because you know, Google looks for people with Asperger's syndrome or ASD or autism, because they are very, very focused, and they're very very clever and very focused generally. Though, you know, so you know, there's a niche. There's a need in the world for people.
Hasn't society changed in that respect, though? Because 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, we wouldn't be having we wouldn't be having this piece of this conversation about neurodiverse people as being useful. I know that's an awful thing to say, but recognised for their talents rather than somebody that's got a problem.
Well, we're looking at the strength-based model now rather than the deficit-based model. So, and I think that's a really valuable thing.
And it's really positive because labelling people for their deficits, I don't think is very helpful at all.
It's not. Sometimes labelling, I've never been one that labels. In my 25 years at school, I've never labelled children, and people used to get really annoyed with me because I wouldn't label children, except if I was trying to get funding for that child. And then if they have a diagnosis. Yes, if they have a label, then that's going to help them. That's going to be to their advantage. But I didn't ever use the label as an excuse for the way I was teaching.
The needs of the child is more important, I feel, what they need. But that's the same that is the same for all children. You know, every child has needs. So
all of us have needs. Yeah,
absolutely.
So something on the other end of on the scale now is the gifted children. So gifted children have diverse needs as well, and often gifted children are overlooked because, as you mentioned a moment ago, some children are very good at hiding who they really are, and gifted children are particularly good at that because they don't want to be different. They want to be just accepted for the way they are. You know, how many movies have you seen where the really smart girl or the really smart boy fails the exams on purpose so that they could be more popular with their friends and not stand out? And gifted children have their own set of issues that they need to work through. Many gifted children, I've done a bit of work around in the gifted space, so which is why I wanted to bring it up, so that we're not just always looking at children. You know,
that's why I like to use the term additional needs rather than special needs.
Yeah,
I don't like that. I don't like that terminology, special educational needs and disability. I don't like that term at all. And I also, the other thing I don't like, I'll just have to share it right now, is when people say the child is a SEND child. Child isn't a SEND child. The child is a child
right,
who has special educational needs.
Yes, that's right. Child first.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So with getting back to the gifted children,
yeah.
well, the gifted, I think, often they do have additional needs, but they often have them in different ways. So if they're very mathematically oriented, or they might be physically gifted, or they might be very very intuitive and have a very high level of social and emotional awareness, where they can read people and they can sum people up just so quickly. There's a whole range. And in fact, I worked with a beautiful lady. Her name is Gloria Van Dong, and she wrote a series of books for children. And now Gloria she must be in her 80s. And if anyone's interested in this, you need to Google. I think it's called the Cheetah book series. I think it's just escaped me at the moment. But if you Google Gloria Van Dong, DONGE, the books will come up, and they're amazing. She has written 5 books, and they're about different cheetahs, and they each have a gift. And she explores the gift, and the other cheetah family and the cheetah friends all sort of work with this gifted cheetah so that they can achieve what they need to achieve. In the back of the book are a whole lot of activities and teacher resources. She's got on her website, she's got a bank of teaching materials, teaching resources. It's really good, and I'm very grateful and honoured to have played a little small part in Gloria's work with that. Now, she did this because she realised when her daughter got to be 40 that she was gifted. She just thought all kids were like that. And it wasn't until her daughter started doing some research. Her daughter's a teacher. Her daughter was doing some research and sort of looking around, and Gloria started being involved in this research too. And it suddenly dawned on her that, all of these social problems that have happened throughout our lives, it's actually because you have these gifts. You're actually gifted. That's why you haven't been able to fit in. And then Gloria suddenly realised she's gifted. Now she's 80. And now they've imparted some of this information to other people. And when people read the book, adults, psychologists read these books, and they go, wow, that just explains a whole lot. So giftedness is also a diverse need that we see in our classrooms. And a lot of teachers aren't trained in identifying the gifted children. We're often trained in the special needs side of it, but we're not often trained in the gifted side of it. And there's a whole range of identifiers so that you can pick the gifted children. And generally there's about 10% in a school are gifted children, right. one in each class maybe. But we don't notice because they don't want to be different, so they just fly under the radar. They just do enough.
Yeah.
Those kids that
it's like girls that have autism often hide it too. It's being brought to the fore.
Because nobody wants to stand out. They just want to fit in. That sense of belonging, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that sense of belonging is really strong. So we just want to fit in where, because we are, as humans, we are creatures who want to go with the tribe. There's safety in being with the clan. Yeah, and there's safety there. So that's important to us. So to blend and fit in rather than be the odd one and maybe kicked out of the tribe back in the day, I'm talking about, of course, has evolved.
That still happens in some cultures, doesn't it?
Well, there's that sense of, losing the safety of the tribe. So people try and blend in. We do it all the time. We all wear masks and we all act in a certain way, depending on the context we're in. We all do it.
Yeah. Well, I was going to bring that up, but it's not really early years, is it? I think you get to a certain age where you don't actually care so much.
I think that's true.
But that's not really early years, is it?
Well, I don't know about that, because I think young children don't really care too much. I think young children really just...
No, the little ones don't. No, that's absolutely true. No, they don't. It's when they get into primary and secondary school.
Yeah, or even just before that, they're starting to sort of find out who they are in the world and get their sense of identity. But it all comes back to the environment. And often I say to people, if things aren't going right in your room, have a look. Is it you, Are you just having a bad day, or are you feeling sick, or are you a bit off colour? Is it the child? Same thing for the child. Undiagnosed issues. Are they a bit off? Did they not sleep well last night? Is it your planning? Have you not planned well enough? Have you not taken into account their developmental levels, their brain development, the voice of the child? Have you not planned well enough? Or is it the environment that you've set up? And 9 times out of 10, it's the way the environment has been set up, because when we think about it, the built environment indicates how we think, feel, and act. When you think about going to a yoga studio,
I think the environment
is very different.
So important.
Well, it dictates how we think, feel, and act. So we have to really think about how we set up the environment if we want children to think, feel, and act in a specific way. We want them to have an inquiring mind. We want the room to be calm, adds to well-being, children's well-being, because the stress level is lower, trauma triggers are lower, the teacher's well-being increases because their stress level is lower. So it all comes back to the environment and being inclusive, so you can accept and incorporate children with diverse needs. You can have that equity because of the way you've set up your spaces in your environment, and you can be very inclusive and make sure that there's something for everyone. Absolutely. So there we have it.
Right.
EI.
People on the chat, can we have some comments? What do you think? Do you agree? How's the environment in your settings, or settings you perhaps see? I'm a strong advocate for the environment. I think if the environment is set up in a really thoughtful way that meets the children's needs, then it makes life so much easier for everybody.
But it's also got to be related to the skill level too, the skill development that
that's part of it. Yeah, I agree.
That sort of links to the your outcomes or your intentions, and it also links to the curriculum documents you're using as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to have a look and see if there's anything else I wanted to bring up. So I think we've covered everything that I've written on my list. Textures and furnishings. I think they can make a big difference to children as well, particularly those with sensory processing problems. I think
they can, and sound awareness as well, a sound environment. I've just created a course with Sue Newman in Boogie Mites, and that's available on Early Years TV with Kathy Brodie at the moment. And we talked a lot about setting up the environment, as I've said, with the Brain Set Environments formula, but incorporating or considering the sound environment too, and making sure we have spaces for children to explore sound a little bit, either in small groups or being guided. That safety comes in then. You're guided by a teacher who's showing you what to do and, sort of almost holding you in their hands to keep you safe while you're exploring with the sounds and the instruments that you might be using and musical activity. So the sound environment plays a part in the physical environment too, and that's what Sue and I were talking about. So we've got that, but thinking about the environment and how we set it up is pivotal, I think, and that's why with the textures that you're talking about is important, because that comes back to acoustics, and these are some of the 16 elements in Brain Set with the acoustics and the soft.
It's about the child that doesn't want to play with the finger paint. I've seen adults grab their hands and put their hands in the paint. We have to really think carefully about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we shouldn't be forcing children to do things anyway, full stop. We should be asking ourselves, why is this child not wanting to do it, rather than forcing them to do it.
But give them options too, I think. So there might be some sensory experiences that for some reason you might want to include some sensory experiences for the children, but offer a range of them and have them, in all of the little spaces that you create, so that wherever they're going to go, at some point, they're going to experience sensory stimulation, just because they can't avoid it because it's everywhere in the room, and it's a calming thing. We learn through our senses. John Medina, in his book Brain Rules, talks about that. We are born natural explorers, and one of the ways we explore and learn is through sensory stimulation. So, being mindful of that.
That's where we start, isn't it? As babies, we explore everything with our senses.
Absolutely. Everything goes to the...
Sorry, Sue. Sorry, Kathy. What were you saying?
I just said, you said about babies, and I said everything goes to their mouth because that's the most sensory organ for a baby, and because they are born natural explorers.
Yeah, and then you have parents telling them to take everything out of their mouths. And actually, that's something I was going to say earlier, is when we're talking about equity and inclusion, I think parents are really important, and they're not all the same. You know, we don't treat the children the same. Why is there this practice that, you know, providing we give parents this and this and this, that's all we need to do? And I don't, you know, I really think we should be helping parents understand, helping parents be stage appropriate, helping parents to be participants, proper participants in their children's learning, not just sitting on the sideline, you know, watching what goes on in preschool or nursery, but actually participating in a proper way. And we, as educators, we should be helping parents, but appreciating that not all parents are the same, and they all need different ways of doing that.
Exactly, because they all have different backgrounds and different experiences as well. And thinking about the accessibility to information as well. You know, some parents don't have a high level of education, so their reading level is quite low. So if
and also that makes them scared. That makes them scared of not being able to participate, because they see us as authority, as we're the educators. You know, it stems back from their schooling, perhaps. And the feelings they had about not being able to achieve at school for themselves. So that makes them scared to be participants, and that's, you know, something else.
That is something else, and even having information accessible to them. So if you're distributing newsletters or emails to the parents, a blanket, or, you know, a lot of places use apps now, and they send photos and a whole lot of text. Maybe minimize the text and use simple conversational language, and just have a few dot points rather than.
And also give. Right. Well, I have somebody that works for me, and she was given some information about her child, which was literally there were some nice paragraphs which were nicely written, but then she was given a whole load of checkpoints. Okay, a list of checkpoints that her child had achieved, but it didn't tell her. Admittedly, she is a practitioner, but it didn't tell her if her child was okay, if her child was doing very well. What things could she be doing with her child that would help her child move forward? And therefore, she felt, well, I suppose she felt not included, really. You know, she was just given she was barraged with a load of information.
Well, she doesn't know how to contribute. She can't contribute. She can't contribute.
Exactly. Yeah. And she's been off on maternity leave, and I showed her what we do in that context, because we brought in something new. And I was very pleased. She was very pleased with it, because I wanted to know what her reaction would be. How would you feel if you'd got this? Which is slightly different. And if anybody wants to see that that document, I can send you it, so you can see what we would give to a parent, so they can see how they can help their child. Right. Okay. Well, we've had a few contributors on the chat. Does anybody want to say anything else before we sign off for the evening?
I think we've covered quite a few things.
We've covered a lot.
Yeah, we've talked about diversity and equity and inclusion. We've talked about, you know, including parents. We've talked about gifted children. We've talked about how to set up environments and, you know, different colours and combinations and design elements to put in place. So I think there's a fair bit in this. What is it, an hour or so?
And if everybody just waits and watches the end, then you'll get some more information. And also, if you can feed back to us, that would be great. Okay, so let me just do the end little video. Thank you very much, Kathy, for joining us. I need to say that. It's been a pleasure. As usual.
And thanks. And yes, that's right. And thanks everybody for joining us too, or who watches the recording.